All right, everyone, welcome. Good morning or good evening, depending on, or middle of the night, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome. This is sort of an experiment. I've been threatening to do this for a long time, which is to say something like a Zohar lab, where just we take this newish edition of the Zohar, the Pritzker edition, and just kind of study it because I think that for a lot of people, the Zohar is a pretty intimidating text, and it is pretty intimidating. Um, it's very intimidating, and I thought that what we would do is just bring on my great friend and scholar Zevi from Secrets of Unity, and just sort of study one of these sections here from the Zohar. And at some level, I kind of picked it out of a hat, but at another level, I picked it because it's a at least an enclosed traditional pericope, and so at least then we're kind of studying something that it maybe has a narrative arc. I'm not sure if it really does. It remains to be seen. I don't. Who knows? Um, but as folks probably know, the Zohar is a really messy text in that it's not really one thing. There's a big section of it, of course, that's the commentary on the Torah, but then there are all kinds of zigs and zags that go all over the place inside of the text. So it's not like an internally coherent text in that way. It's more like a little library of sort of Zoharic literature that we call the Sefer Zohar. And the section we're looking at, the pericope we're looking at, is traditionally referred to as Yanuka, the child. It's just about a weird, brilliant child who's very strange and might be divine. Um, but at any rate, it's buried kind of in the middle of Parashat Balak. Although in the Cremona edition, it's actually in Devarim, which is interesting because Devarim doesn't have much. There's not much Zohar on Devarim, and so it originally in the Cremona edition it's stuck there, but in the most traditions, including the Mogolios, it's actually stuck in Parshat Balak. So what we're going to do is we're just going to read it and comment on it as we go. So it's not going to be anything super fancy about it. We're going to dive in and out of the Aramaic, I guess, as we need to or as we want to. And again, I don't know how Zevi feels. And I'll let Zevi say some introductory words as well. But I feel definitely like a beginner in Zohar. I always feel like a beginner. I never, as much as I've studied this text, I never feel like I have a grasp on it. I always feel like it's, when they talk about beginner's mind, I always have beginner's mind when it comes to Zohar. So, not going to be here to impress anyone in terms of like some deep Kabbalah knowledge because this text is bewildering. And, again, I want to be honest and humble about my Zohar chops, which are not highly developed. And even the Aramaic can be often quite challenging. So, with that said, I want to have Zevi say a couple of introductory words, and then we'll dive in. We'll have at least an hour and a half or so, and we'll get as far as we can, and then we'll do it again next week, I suppose, until we get finished with the Yanuka. So, Zevi, thank you, brother. Thank you for coming on and diving into some Zohar with me.
Thanks for having me, Justin. I think it's a really great opportunity. We talk poetic about how great this text is and how wonderful it is and how abstruse and esoteric and arcane it is. But what a great chance to actually, as you're saying, do this in the Zohar lab and get a chance to pull out a classic piece of Zohar and go through it together in good old fashion. And it's probably going to be very bizarre and confusing. And I think anyone that's coming for mystical enlightenment on the spot might be disappointed. But if people are coming to have a good time to grapple with a very beautiful classic text, then I think they're in the right place, and I'm excited to do it with you.
Wonderful, thank you. I just messaged Zevi out of the blue and was like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And Zevi was about it. So thank you for being willing to jump in.
Well, it's a pleasure.
So, all right. Well, I guess I opened the trap, I guess I'll be the first to walk into it. So, let's start there. And folks, the links for the section we're looking at are in the description. So if you want to follow along in English or Aramaic, at least for this first part, and so you can do that over at Safaria. Also, I'll put the link in for the diplomatic edition of the Daniel Matt text. Folks want to look at that. It begins on page in the PDF, page 83. If you want to look at it in Daniel Matt's his diplomatic Aramaic edition. All right. So Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yehuda were traveling on the road, and they reached a place called the village of Sichnin, which is a real place. You can go there today. They lodged with a woman who had a small son, a Yanuka, who was in school every day. That day he left school and came home, and he saw these wise men. His mother said to him, "Come near these distinguished gentlemen, and you will gain a blessing from them." He approached them, but before getting too close, he turned back. He said to his mother, "I don't want to go near them because they haven't recited the Shema today. And I've been taught that whoever does not recite the Shema at its proper time is under a ban, is under a nidui the entire day." So, where to begin in all this? Um, so first of all, the Yanuka, the child, and Yanuka, you get the sense that this is like a 4 or 5-year-old, 6-year-old. It's not an adolescent. You shouldn't think of this person. They're like in the cheder. They're like this is like a 5-year-old. And so so what's really interesting, we'll get to this in just a second, is that he knows without talking to them, just by getting close to them, that they're potentially in violation of a serious breach of Torah, which already gives us a clue into the fact this child is very unusual. In fact, later on we'll hear the rabbis declare he's not even a human being, and he may not be a human being. So again, also we're not told why they come here, at least if you read the Daniel Matt edition. But if you look at the traditional Aramaic, it does give you some clue why they might be there, because this is also the town where the Sava comes from, the another really important character in Zohar mythology we'll get to maybe later. But it's interesting about this pericope, at least as it opens, is it doesn't really give us much of a clue as to why they're there. They just sort of show up, and that's sort of the dreamlike character of the Zohar. The Chavraya, the companions, are just roaming around, and they sort of, it's like a dream where you kind of come to and you're just somewhere. And in the sense, in this way, it's very much like they sort of come to and they find themselves at this house. Zevi?
Yeah, Justin, you mentioned the age of this child, and we're going to see soon that the child is very brilliant and articulate and learned and perhaps even superhuman. But the word itself, Yanuka, is not a typical name for a child. Yanuka is from the Hebrew yonek, which is to suckle, really. It's a very poetic description, actually, and it's a word which is quite important for the Kabbalists in their relationship to the divine energies, that they're suckling from the energies. So there's something already poetic in the very name that he gets here in the section. And as you're saying, we're kind of just thrown into this very quick setup, and we have our characters, and we're on the road running already, where we land with the wheels spinning.
Keep going.
Yeah, I think we continue.
Yeah. So they heard this, and they raised their hands, and they blessed him. That's a pretty impressive thing to do, to bless someone who's basically just condemned you.
Right.
To a ban. Their reaction is not immediately defensive. Their reaction is to bless him. And they said, "Certainly so." Right. So they admit they haven't said the Shema, but today we were busy with the bride and groom, who did not have what they needed, and were delaying in their coupling. It's a great translation. There was no one making an effort on their behalf, and so we did. And so we didn't recite the Shema. And the justification here is a classic justification from the Talmud. Whoever is occupied with the mitzvah is exempt from another mitzvah. Specifically, the Talmud mentions who is able to not have to say Shema, depending on if they're mourning or if they're a bride and groom or what have you. So they said to him, "My son, how did you know that?" Right? How did you know? And he replied, "By the smell of your clothes, I knew when I came near you." And they were astonished. They washed their hands and broke bread, and we'll start back there again. This is already the first thing I think that it's a really important a glimpse into the nature of this strange child, is that he can judge them by smelling them. And for folks who know some Tractate Sanhedrin, you'll know that that's a trait the Messiah has. That the Messiah is the only character, and in Jewish lore, to my knowledge, Zevi, that is able to detect sin through smell.
Right. He's Mereach V'dayin. He's the one who smells and judges. Yeah.
Yep. And so this is clearly, again, the text is, and it's funny because Matt doesn't mention this in his notes either. This seems like a really I mean, I don't know, really important skill this child has. Is
It's
that
an
he has
interesting admission, yeah, on his
it's a,
behalf.
it's really conspicuous, I think, that that he's able to do basically a messianic thing. He has this miraculous ability of to smell and to judge.
Yeah,
So
it's
so
not
yeah,
very it's not very far off either, right? That often there's an association between the child and the Messiah. Those are two types that are conflated as well, right?
yeah, yeah. Again, it's just an interesting. I mean, maybe this Daniel Matt just thought everyone knows this, but I don't know.
Nice.
um, but it's interesting because he can smell it on their clothing. He's not smelling it on their bodies.
Yeah,
Like,
there is this motif of the mitzvot, the commandments that we fulfill as being the clothing that we wear,
mm,
and also the mitzvot of having a smell. There's this classic description of the smell of the etrog and the smell of the mitzvah. There's the smell of Eden, which is on pieces of clothing that the patriarchs in Genesis, according to the Midrash, smell on each other. So there definitely is this rabbinic motif that associates the smell of clothing and mitzvah. And it's interesting that sort of what's our odor as we walk through the world, and it's our good deeds in some sense. And he's a sensitive child, and he smells that on them. He smells that there's a lack,
mhm.
and they're
He
legally
smells the
justified.
lack.
He smells lack, right? He smells the
Yeah,
lack of Shema on them,
yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's
and
not
they're
because
basically
we don't think of odors as being negative, like a lack of something.
right, right.
But he can
But there's
smell
the
the lack.
fragrance of Shema, which is not
Hmm.
present on them, right?
Right.
Which is interesting because they've covered their bases because they were busy in a very beautiful thing. They were busy in seeing to the needs, raising money for a bride and groom. But still, even though they were legally not culpable, they still didn't get that
Hmm.
smell of Shema. They still didn't get that. They still didn't get that. So that's an interesting thing that he picks up on.
That's right. And is it the case? Like, I mean, I know that bride and bridegrooms and other kinds of people are exempt from saying Shema, but would they be in this case? If assuming that they were, I guess, assuming they were the only people capable of doing what they needed to do for the bride and groom, then they would be exempt.
Right. It's an interesting justification because, as
Yeah.
far as I understand this rabbinic loophole of osek b'mitzvah, patur mitzvah, if someone's busy in a mitzvah, they're exempt. It Firstly, you have to be the only one that's able to be doing it, and
Right.
no one else. And it also has to be so consuming that you cannot stop to do the mitzvah. And saying Shema seemingly is not too much of an obligation. Like you can take 2 minutes and say Shema, and that either means that they were really, really full to the brink, or for them saying Shema was more than a 2 minute activity. If they were mystics, it would have been an hour of meditation before and after, and they couldn't do it they couldn't do it properly, so therefore didn't do it at all. Perhaps that's what's happening here.
Or bride and groom, it's maybe it's the sod of the thing, right? The bride and groom aren't a human bride and groom.
Mm.
That this is some Sphirot stuff that
They were busy in a different unification, you're saying.
yeah, it's a different yichud. Like the yichud they're doing is some other deeper mystical thing that it has nothing actually to do with the.
Interesting. That reading didn't occur to me. That's an interesting one. There is talk of the Rashbi, or Shimon Bar Yochai, the hero of the Zohar, that when he's famously in the cave for 13 years with his son, that over there he's exempt from any mitzvah because he's
Right.
just busy in creating the yuchadim. He's affecting what the mitzvah affects. So that's an interesting sort of secret reading here, which didn't jump to me.
Yeah, and if the Rashbi also just says he's exempt from ever saying Shema.
Right. Because I mean, because he's affecting Shema without having to
right,
say Shema.
exactly, yeah.
Right.
So at any rate, yeah, I think there might be. I don't know. Again, it's the thing that the Daniel Matt commentary goes immediately to the halachic nature of it, but it might not be just merely a halachic question. Maybe something else going on there. All right, do you want to pick up?
Sure. It's also a nice point here, just by the way, is that like someone else's material needs, like the bride and groom, let's say it's a physical bride and groom, their material needs, according to both halacha and the Zohar and Kabbalah, they trump your own spiritual needs, which means you can't say, "Oh, I'm so holy, I can't help to, my friend who's in need." It's like, no. You put aside your spiritual work and you go and help. There's a phrase amongst the Hasidim that the physical need of the other is your spiritual concern. And I think that's a beautiful point here as well, which is just kind of between the lines.
Yeah, and again, I think it's exactly right that they're not mysticism. The mysticism of the Kabbalah is very grounded. It's grounded in the mitzvot, and here the mitzvot of assisting a bride and groom is just that weighty.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're gonna see how there's kind of neat themes here that move from one to the other, and we're gonna move now into this theme of hand washing, what hands mean, and we'll see that open up. He replied, "By the smell of your clothes, I knew when I came near you." They were astonished. They washed their hands and broke bread. Rabbi Yehuda's hands were dirty, and when washing his hands, he blessed before washing. Right. So customarily in Judaism, anytime we're going to be breaking bread, we wash Nitzilat Yadayim, and there's a bit of debate about the order of that. Do we bless, then wash, wash, then bless? And over here, we're informed that Rabbi Yehuda blesses and then washes. He said to them, if the child says to them, if you are disciples of Rabbi Shmaya the Pious, a Talmudic sage, you shouldn't have blessed with filthy hands. Whoever blesses with filthy hands is liable to death. So he's really holding no punches here. First he goes for an excommunication. Now it's the death penalty. He's really quite a polite boy to be around, as we could see. The child opened saying, and now the child's going to admonish him for washing his hands in the incorrect order. Quoting from Exodus, when they come into the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, they shall wash with water that they do not die. We learn from this verse that whoever is not careful about this and appears before the king with filthy hands is liable to death. So from the fact that the verse says you should wash your hands and not die, means that if you don't wash your hands, you will die. Why? Because the fingers of a human being inhabit the height of the world, which I thought was an exquisite line here, and I wanted to hear what you thought about this, Justin. That the reason why we're liable to death is because the fingers of the human being inhabit the height of the world. They're omdim berumo shel olam. What did that jumped right at me? What did you see there, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, and there's two things that are jumping out here that are really interesting. The first, and we're going to see this a lot, and when Zevi and I may have a disagreement about this, is just the degree to which the Yanuka is meant to be kind of a Jesus-like character, right? Because in many ways he parallels Jesus a lot. For instance, we already got the messianic stuff, what he can smell and judge. But I think that what's interesting about the Yanuka is that whereas Jesus was very liberal about the question of hand washing, the Yanuka is the strictest possible person when it comes to this, well beyond normal halakha, right? He says, no, you're violated, you're subject to the death penalty. So it's interesting that he becomes a kind of anti-Jesus in that way. We're introduced to him as a kind of a messianic character, and the issue of Shabbat and the issue of hand washing were divisive issues between Jesus and the Pharisees of the day. I guess to jump to the line you were talking about, the fingers of the human being inhabit the height of the world. There's two things that jump out to me about that. Is that one, his hands were dirty because he was doing the mitzvah of helping the bride and groom, and so it's that at some level it's a really righteous dirt, but still has to come off before you transition. And also again, just how extraordinarily strict the Zohar is when it thinks about halakha, and the reason why it is that strict, right? We sometimes think of mysticism as being a little bit kind of hippy dippy liberal on the rules. The Zohar is anything but that when it comes to Jewish law, halakha. And also the connection between the 10 fingers, of course, and the 10 sefirot, right? Especially the middle finger, as we'll see in a minute, that this is a core idea that that in many ways our hands are the hands of God, and that we are, depending on how we use them, we can use them for righteous ends, and we can use them for sinister ends. And that idea that these are the sefirot and they're literally bodily attached to us is an amazing idea.
Yeah, there is a beautiful thing there, the sort of the reflection of the microcosm, the macrocosm, the as above, so below. And for the Kabbalists, as you're saying, it's a very, very embodied interpretation. It's the human body, which is the body of the divine, and the mitzvot, reflecting the limbs of the divine. And it's interesting. We're gonna see what's happening here with the fingers, and we're going to see how they're connected to this threat. Maybe I'll read one more paragraph, and then we'll reflect. There's a certain finger on the human hand, the finger that Moses raised. It is written, you shall make the bars for the dwelling, 5 for the bars of the one side of the dwelling, and 5 bars for the boards of the second side of the dwelling, referring here to the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in the desert when the Jews were leaving Egypt. And it is written, and the central bar in the middle of the boards, running from end to end. Exodus 26 through 28. Now, if you say that the central bar is another one, not included in those five, not so. Rather, the central bar is one of those five. Two on this side, two on that side, and one in the middle. The one in the middle is the central bar, the pillar of Jacob, mystery of Moses. Mystery.
Yeah, of course. I was saying earlier that we're lucky that this section of the Zohar doesn't have all the constant like Raza de Raza, like mystery of mysteries, and this section's a little more tame when it comes to those kinds of things, but we do get it a little bit. So maybe we can explain this a little bit,
Yeah.
because I was trying to find a picture to illustrate this, but it's actually kind of hard. This is a very obscure. This is the kind of thing that Zohar loves. Is taking very obscure points about the Torah and the law and making them very big deal. And so basically, what we're talking about here are the planks that go on the walls of the Mishkan, and basically the girding structure that holds the whole thing up. And so there are planks aside from the east wall. That's the one that the Kohanim enter into. That's covered with a
Goatskin?
it's like a sheet. But the rest of it is actually built up of these movable, these kind of like Kia planks that you can kind of take apart. And I think what's interesting, they're made of acacia wood and they're covered in gold. What's really interesting about this, I think, in a lot of ways, is that the middle plank is given the priority, but it's also the one that it holds the whole thing together, and it's also hidden. And it's interesting that Hashem told them to cover it with gold, despite the fact that it would never be. You never see it when the Mishkan's actually built standing. It holds the whole thing together, and yet it's completely invisible. And there's something about the power of that the thing that is the most important is also the least visible. That's an interesting.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Just to step back here a second, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built as a portable temple, and they would travel based on the appearance of the divine clouds and basically moving on a whim, sometimes staying for many years in one place and sometimes moving very briefly. So it had to be built in a way that was portable. So the poles that went along the side, they were connected through these beams, 5 in total, and according to the Midrash, the middle pole plays a central role, excuse the pun, and plays a miraculous role, right? Because the other ones, they run from one side to the other. The middle pole miraculously bends around the corner,
Right.
all the way, right? Which naturally is impossible. It's wood coated in metal, but there's a very special and lofty place that this Bereich HaTichon, this middle beam holds. And what he's doing here is he's drawing a correspondence between the fingers of the human hand and the Bereich HaTichon, the middle one, which is going to be the middle finger, which he calls the pillar of Jacob, mystery of Moses. And I think what we're seeing here right away is the sense that the Kabbalists think very laterally, that they create these associations. So the finger, the pole of the Mishkan, Jacob, Moses, and we're going to see why he's making that parallel. He's going to see why he's running that pole between these various ideas in just a second.
Right. And it is a beautiful connection between the Sfirot, the Mishkan, and the human being. That, like, in many ways, how they're connected that way. Like,
yes.
like there's a connection, there's a metaphysical connection, because we think of the Mishkan as how the Israelites were mediated by the Kohanim, the priests, and they mediated for God. But here it's a continuum, that they're actually
Right.
at some level deeply metaphysically connected. The middle finger is metaphysically the same as the Sfirot, and the middle finger is connected literally metaphysically to the Mishkan. I love the idea that, again, for them it's all one big web of connectivity.
Yes, yeah, it is a beautiful vision, and that point is true. That already in the Midrash, I believe it begins this association of the parts of the human body with the parts of the Mishkan. That the pillars represent the ribs, and then we have the lungs as the coverings, and then the heart is the altar. So there's this one-to-one comparison, and obviously every time we tell that parallel, we tell it slightly differently. So here it's the fingers that are holding together the beams. And I think if we don't make it explicit just yet, it's going to be Yaakov, which represents Tiferet, and Tiferet is going to be the middle beam. But I think we may see that in just a second.
And maybe for folks who are following along, what might not be obvious in the rabbinical logic here is the connection between washing the hands and the Mishkan. is that once the temple was destroyed, the Mishkan becomes the table, right? The temple becomes the dinner table. And so everything that one was obligated to do in the Mishkan, at some levels, the rabbis reproduce at the dinner table. Basically, the dinner table becomes the sacred site, the core of the home. And so therefore the issue of washing of hands, because it was a central issue in the Mishkan, becomes a central issue at the dinner table. So that's the connective tissue in the rabbinical mind. Otherwise, it just seems like, why are they talking about washing hands and now they're going to talk about the tabernacle? It's because the tabernacle is the dinner table.
Yes, that's very good to point out that the priest, yes, that sometimes you take these things for granted. The priests, when they come in to do their service, they wash their hands, both in tabernacle and the temple, and the shulchan replaces the mishkan, particularly certain parts of it, and therefore we come when we come to a table to eat, and eating is a very central theme for the Zohar, the mystery of eating, right? When we come to eat at the table, we're effectively performing an act of, we're priests, we're serving at this divine meal to elevate. We're making our own sacrifices. So that's a very beautiful connection there. Yep. Will you continue reading, Justin?
I will. So corresponding to this, 5 fingers on the human hand, with the central bar, the middle, the greatest, and the highest of all, by which the others are sustained, right? So you can see your middle finger is the longest of them. Those 5 bars are called 500 years, through which the tree of life extends. There's a midrash about this, that it takes 500 years to go up the tree of life. The Holy Covenant is aroused by 5 fingers of the hand. It is a concealed matter that I have spoken. Now, here's where we might get into territory again, where Zevi and I and Daniel Matt might disagree. But I guess before we get there, I guess they laid the correspondence out on the nose, I guess, at least at this point. So I don't think, I'm going to belabor that too much. But yeah, this is the part where we might get to the more sexual reading, the more autoerotic reading, where the word arouse there in Aramaic is a pretty explicit word. I mean, I think that they could have used a lot of words, but the word definitely has sexual connotations to it. And I mean, again, the idea here of being aroused by the 5 fingers of the hand is a concealed matter of what I've spoken. That phrase, that the Aramaic there for "it's a concealed matter of what I've spoken" is only used in that formulation when it talks about divine arousal. So the question is, what are the hands arousing? And of course, I think Daniel Matt's reading and many other people's reading is that this is sort of a, this is God arousing God's self. And that we also arouse God when we are engaging in mitzvot and righteous activity, and that arousal stimulates the divine energy to flow out of the sefirot down to us. So I know that Zevi, you mentioned to me that you have some issue with seeing sex and Jesus all over the Yanuka. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. It's funny. We were chatting about this before, and I said that scholars love to stir up a controversy. So there's this Christocentrism and this phallocentrism that every text must be either homoerotic or about Jesus or about something of that nature. And I think scholars overdo it sometimes. But when the text is very clearly doing it, I'm the first to admit that the Kabbalists that's a hypersexual system, and their universe is one which is sustained by a heros gamos, by this divine coupling between the masculine and the feminine, the divine, and that's the whole goal of the Kabbalists. It is an erotic goal. I'm far be it from me to deny that. And I think we have to look on a case by case basis what they're saying here and trying to understand it. And I think over here, there's a few good reasons to lean to the reading which you're saying here and which Matt puts forth. Also, the Holy Covenant is a not so much coded word for the bris, for the circumcised penis. That is the way that it's referred to in Lashon Kodesh as the Ois Bris Kodesh, the Holy Covenant. And that's not a problem for the Kabbalists to be discussing. I think some people may assume that the Kabbalists, being religious figures, are going to be prude. They're not. But I think there's a lot to unpack in these very short lines, which is worth unpacking. And I think that discovering the sexuality or eroticism here is really just a first layer. I think there's something deeper here, which is the fact that it's a Yanuka who's describing this. It's a child who's describing, and it's interesting because the Kabbalists, when they speak about eroticism, it's usually in a divine coupling between a heterosexual masculine and feminine relationship. And the Yanuka, the child who's not yet at the age of such a relationship, is describing an act of autoeroticism. And there's something that we can pick up. There's an immaturity in his sexuality, right? I was chatting about this text with a good friend of mine, Melilla Helner Ashad, who's a great scholar of the Zohar. I've become friends with here in Jerusalem. And
very humble flex. I was chatting with this with a friend of mine. I think one of the luminary scholars of our day has published a lot of really amazing stuff on the Zohar. So
yeah, and not just an incredible, not just a really world-class scholar, but also a really beautiful human and mystic in her own right. But so we were chatting about the Yanuka because I wanted to get some insight from her, and I got a chance actually to sit down and read it some with her. It was a very beautiful experience. And she was pointing out these themes that the child is very clever and really knows how to play the game, knows how to do the Kabbalist thing of like the middle finger is Tiferet, is Yaakov, is 500, is like really knows, but like hasn't had sex and is therefore is using these immature imagery in some sense, and there's a lack of development. And we're gonna and she says we should look out for these themes as we go along. So I wouldn't disagree with you that this is sexual. I think it's an underdeveloped. I think it's an infantile sexuality in some sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because there's a variant reading of that of Itar. There's a variant reading that actually shows up for whatever reason in Cordovero. It's in it's in his commentary, which is again because folks may not know this, but the Zohar exists in lots of manuscripts and there are lots of different readings of it. But the other reading of that word arouse is iskazer, like has a lot of meanings. Circumcise is one of them, and so it's just interesting, like that. On the one, we have two almost different readings here, where one is aroused and one is circumcised. When one is about sort of limiting sexual energy at some level, bringing it into control. The other is obviously instigating it. So it's really fascinating that the variant and the words there are relatively similar in spelling or whatever. It's interesting that the manuscript tradition could contain two very different readings,
right,
almost contradictory readings.
Right. No, that is interesting. Yeah, I think there's also a lot of interesting. I don't know how much we'll be able to unpack here, but we kind of just dropped in this notion that it was the what was the expression we used here in English? It was the pillar of Jacob, right? And the mystery of Moses, and Moses we'll get to in a second, and the 500 years. Jacob, the Kabbalists associate with the sphere of Tiferet, which counting not from the beginning but from Chesed is the fifth, and it's along the central pole. It's that which holds together Chesed and Din, or Chesed and Gvura, and we're going to see. I think it's important for those that understand what that may mean. It's important to hold that image in mind because these are the sort of the colors that the Kabbalists paint with. And when he puts a splash of Tiferet and a splash of Moses and a splash of the number 5, like he's painting a picture with these words here in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, it's really important to hold on to those because, I mean, again, this was written as insider baseball with Moshe de Leon and his circle. They all know the code language, and we're walking into a conversation in which we often don't know the code language the way that they're speaking. Gonna do the next paragraph? You want me to do it?
Sure. Therefore, all blessings of the priest depend upon the fingers. The spreading of Moses' hands was based on this. So the blessings of the priest, the Kohanim, they spread their fingers when they bless the people, right? From Star Trek, it's been made famous. And then the spreading of the hands of Moses when the Jews go to war against who are they fighting at the time? It's Midian, maybe. Moses famous
Amalek.
Yeah. Moses famous raises his hands and it's held up. So this is the hands that we're connecting here, the priest and Moses. If all this inheres in them, if all of this is present in the fingers, isn't it right that they should be clean when by them one blesses the holy, blessed one? So if so much power is invested in the fingers that they arouse the holy covenant, they're the blessings of the priest, they're that which Moses holds over the people, should we not wash them? So here he's continuing to throw shade at the guy for not washing his hands. For by them and their paradigm, the holy name is blessed. So you who are wise, how could you be so careless about this and not heed Rabbi Shmaya the pious, who said that all filth and all dirt are offered to the other side, the Sitra Achra, for the other side is nourished by this filth and dirt, which is why the finger bowl water is chayva, sin, and chayva, an obligation. Okay, so let's unpack that just a little bit. Pretty dense stuff here. So just to back up a second, in the Kabbalistic system, the cosmos is generally divided into two sides: as the side of the sacred, and the other side, the side of the impure, the klipot, generally speaking. And the side of the klipot needs sustenance, needs something to continue its existence, but it doesn't get that directly from the face of God, from the side of the holy. So it takes bits and pieces. So the dirt underneath the nails is little bits of sustenance that if we're not careful about, it will be sustained by them. And so there's the tradition, therefore, of washing the hands before, and the washing of the hands before the meal is an obligation, which is chayva, which is the Hebrew for obligation. But chayva, if you switch out the hey for an aleph at the end, becomes chova, which is sin. Sin referred to as the lack, the absence. It's that which the other side, the Sitra Achra, is weaning from in some sense here.
That's right. It's also interesting that the argument here is about washing the hands before the meal, but they're talking about what now he's switched. The Yanuka has switched his reasoning. He sort of moved the goalpost, right? Because the finger bowl water is about the Mayim Achronim at the end of a meal.
Right.
And so it's interesting that, like, yeah, I mean, we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but I feel like he's bait and switched us. The question is what we do at the beginning of the meal, not at the end. And it could be the case at the end of the after benching or whatever, that is also, because isn't the case in your tradition that the finger bowl water is even removed from the table?
Yeah.
It's like that impure.
Yes.
I've seen, when I was in yeshiva, I remember them taking it away, and I was like, because I've seen people keep it on the table, and I'm like, wow, because it's for the klipot, like it is impure. But it's interesting. Yeah, he switched, and it's a fun pun, chova and chova, that the writer's switching between Aramaic and Hebrew to make the pun work, which whatever, it's Zohar. But I don't know. What do you think about that move that now he switched?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think part of something to observe here, the Zohar has a real power of narrative that it can pull us right into the story. But I think it's worth observing here that the story is being set in a certain context, and the context of that story is this meal at the home between these bizarre group of characters that have this cast that's been pulled together. So if the meal is now going to be a central thing, we're going to be playing around between the blessing before the meal, the blessing after the meal, and it's funny because he did that very smoothly, that he pulled it over me as well, and I didn't notice that either, because there's obviously the washing before and the washing after, but the bowl is after. I think there's perhaps an element here for, as we were saying, for the Kabbalists, where there is this very natural, like, lateralization where if two things are connected, like energetically or symbolically, they have no problem like moving between them.
Right.
It's like they're dealing in a realm which is sort of atemporal, where it's like it doesn't, like, did this happen before or later? It doesn't. There's a famous line that the rabbis use, right? That there's no before and after in the Torah. Ein muhtam u'muchar. So maybe that's what he's tapping into here. Like, he feels that energetically or symbolically there's an affinity between the two, and therefore he has no problem bouncing back and really like slapping back from one to the other, because this whole thing is one big slap down. It's like,
Right.
even this thing he says, you who are wise, how could you be so careless? It's like calling them wise is not doing them a compliment. Like he's doing that to rub it in.
No, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, again, this is where my like Brisker Litvak mind, is always operating. I'm like, hold on, like this is not the same thing anymore. And I cannot get into that like the Zohar mindset where like yeah, I know that there's no early, no late in the Torah, whatever. That stuff also makes me crazy. But here it's like like he's making an argument, and I'm like, yeah, you might be right about when to say the bracha for that, but now you've switched and it's a whole different mitzvah entirely. But I don't know, it's the kind of things that jump to my mind when I'm reading this stuff. This is interesting. I mean, do you know of anyone who, based on the Zohar, would say the bracha after washing their hands? Would do it the Zohar way?
We all say the bracha. I mean, when I wash for bread, I say the bracha after washing my hands. As far as I know, that's mainstream practice.
Yeah. It's interesting. There was a debate about it in the Middle Ages. I wonder where the other side went.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a debate when it comes to all mitzvahs, all the way back in the Talmud, of do we make the bracha before the mitzvah or after the mitzvah? And there are some cases, and almost all the cases, we make it before. Overly asiyasa is the Talmudic phrase. But it's a very, I mean, it's like a very part of the beauty of the text is that they're playing with 1,000 years of rabbinic debate and of midrashim and of this and that. And what we're trying to do here between the two of us is to bring those things that are beneath the surface up to the surface. But this is a classic debate that bothers the rabbis for pages of Talmud, of do we bless before or after? So it's like he's making it as if like they were just ignoramuses, that they just went and watched the other way. But it's like, no, they were following one position, and he's saying, no, you guys should have been following the position of the other one. So it's an inter-rabbinic discourse that he's engaging in here.
Right. And I wonder if the Middle Ages, they did do it differently. I don't know if this is an indictment of how, because the Zohar is very self-conscious of the lack of piety on the part of its fellow countrymen. I mean, that's the thing they lament constantly, is no one wears tefillin anymore. Like they're always, and therefore they make tefillin the biggest deal possible. And so I wonder if it's just like, again, this is not just the Yanuka, shading on these rabbis, but also shading on the practices of medieval Spanish Jews, or the laxness thereof. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, the whole attitude of the Yanuka, this is another point which I have to give credit to Melilla for. The whole attitude of the Yanuka of showing up these greater rabbis is in some sense a personification of the authors of the Zohar, who are these new, creative, very bold, imaginative authors who are smacking back against the rabbinic establishment with this really wild, imagery and this lateral exegesis. And in some sense, this whole, like, it's a polemic against the old rabbinic establishment, and on behalf of this young wonder child, and in some sense they're writing themselves into that role.
That's a great point. All right, I guess I'll continue.
Go for it.
Of course, what we constantly get, they were astonished and could not speak.
They're writing a very strong, very real straw manning the opposition here.
No, for real. So, and it's funny because immediately after it says they could not speak, Rabbi Yehuda speaks. Again, I just love how the Talmud, it's like, and they couldn't speak, and then they did.
Once they caught their breath, it took them a minute, but they came back. They came back with something clever.
Yep. So Rabbi Yehuda says, and it's interesting, right? Because he doesn't offer a counter argument, right? He says, my son, what is your father's name, right? It's interesting that we don't have them clap back against this for whatever reason.
Right.
At some level, they're admitting defeat.
Well, that's when they're saying they could not speak. That's them having no response, right?
Right. So they've lost the argument here. The Rabbi Yehuda says, "My son, what is your father's name?" And the child was silent for a moment. And it's interesting. Now he's silent. We have both of them exchanging silences. He rose and he went to his mother and kissed her, and he said to her, "Ima, mother, who are these wise men were asking me about father? Should I tell them?" Which is interesting because she's in the room. One gets this, they're eating, right? So it's in the sense that you would think they would all be in the room, and yet the Yanuka goes over and like tells his mother what clearly she should be hearing, I think.
Yeah.
But at any rate,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the wise men are talking about father. Should I tell them? And she replied, my son, have you tested them? And he says, well, I have, and I found them lacking.
I tested them and they did not come out looking good.
Right. And also they're sitting there.
Yeah.
Like, so again, I love the trying to imagine the scene, right, where the Yanuka is sort of, I don't know, clearly the rabbis know they're lacking because they just got astonished and were shut down. So it's interesting again, like the Yanuka is sort of saying the obvious, but I guess it's to help the reader.
There might be two other possibilities here. One is more terrestrial and unfortunately a bit misogynistic and patriarchal. The other is a bit more spiritualized. The first ground level reading is that very often women would not participate in where the men were breaking bread. The women would be in the kitchen. So there is a real possibility that he's actually standing up and going to the kitchen where his mother is, which is unfortunate reality, but we're here to speak. We're here to warts and all. The other possibility is, of course, when we say mother in the Zohar, where we're referring to the great mother, the mother who we kiss, the Shechina, and then the father, who is father. It's obvious. It's Kutchabrichu. It's the divine father. So there is perhaps a sense also here where we're bringing in these spiritual characters into the story, turning to, and we're going to see that it's an intimate moment between him and his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Or between him and Shechina. And we're going to see in a second that it's actually a bit of a painful subject, or which may even been a little insensitive for the guest to assume, that there was a father in the picture. And I think we're going to see a moment here, which I think is really a very tender moment in just a second. Between all the banter and between all the slaps that Yanuka is giving, there's also a child here, right? And I think it's good to remember that.
Right. Yeah, and again, that other higher level, right? That if this is Shechina's son, again, that has that kind of, we have the father, Ima and Abba, and the Yanuka, and you're like, this is again like,
Right.
I'm not sure if this is like again like parodying the Jesus stuff, because again, people have to remember at the time, this is when the cult of Mary is really getting its foothold in Spain. Really, I mean, in many ways, I think that scholars have rightly pointed out that Shechina is sort of the Jewish answer to the cult of Mary at some level. And again, I think that the Trinitarian reading of this is it's especially when we get to this next section, it's a little on the nose.
I set myself up for that one.
I mean, but it's overdetermined, right? Like everything else in the Zohar. It's not like it's one thing. What's happening here is always happening at like 6 different levels.
Sure. Yeah.
And while the Mary, God, Jesus stuff is happening, the rabbis are also the writers of this are doing lots of things at once.
Yeah.
And so if it is that, it's highly overdetermined. It's certainly not just that. It's not merely that.
Yeah. Part of the beauty here, of course, is how many strata they're playing at simultaneously. And I think we're trying our best just to pull bits and pieces from that. But I mean, people spend an entire life with a section of the Zohar like this. So, and hopefully we'll be able to show why that's a legitimate, pursuit because of the depth and complexity, and particularly beautiful when we have these characters that we're now engaging in.
Right. And just playful. I love how playful this text is. It's very comedic.
Yeah.
So his mother whispered to him, and he returned to them. Now it's great that we don't actually learn what she whispered to him.
I love that.
Yeah. Like we get again the text just like it's messing with us. It's like we're reading a secret, the secrets of secrets, and then the text tells us that the Shechina whispered something to the Yanuka, and we don't get to find out what it is. And he says, "You're asking about father. You're asking," and again, I think that this is a place where Abba is far better. That they should have left it. The father makes it sound so Victorian and 19th century. I think Abba really, leaving it as Abba makes it feel much more tender, like you said. So you're asking.
It helps so that they don't write my father or our father. They just say father. It's like it's a bit more bold and out there.
Yeah, and they do capitalize it. And so again, like the editorializing, Matt's editorializing clearly he's also flagging to us that this is not just some regular old dude. So you ask about father. Well, he's departed from the world. And whenever holy pious ones are traveling on the road, he drives the donkey behind them. If you are exalted holy ones, how could you have missed him? Following you as a donkey driver, a taya. They're using an Arabic word here. But right from the start, I saw who you are, and now I see through you. I love that. I see right through you. For Father never sees a donkey and fails to goad it from behind to bear the yoke of Torah. Since you weren't worthy enough for Father to be your donkey driver, I won't say who Father was. This is real shade.
Yeah. He's
Like,
laying it on thick.
yeah, this is real shade. So maybe we can say a little bit more about this. So what folks may not know is that there is another pericope that's sort of the companion to Yanuka, Sava, the old man donkey driver, and it's the exact same setup. The chavraya, the companions are on the road, and donkey drivers, of course, were kind of the lowest of the low in the medieval world and ancient world. And this donkey driver does the same thing that the Yanuka does. It outwits the chavraya. And again, it also turns out the donkey driver is not a donkey driver. It's some kind of and it turns out that, and we don't even learn in the donkey driver never mentions the Yanuka. If you read the section on, I don't think it does. And the Sava, if you read that pericope, it doesn't mention having a son, which is interesting and weird. But at any rate, I like the idea that we typically think of the Shekhinah as being in exile, but here it's the father in exile. It's the partsuf, I guess, of Abba and Ima, of Abba that's in exile. So it's interesting that he's not in the world, and then immediately it talks about how he's in the world. He is in the world of the donkey driver. So it's, again, the Zohar is like loves just mucking about with logic. It'll say he's departed from the world, and yet, what do we know about the father? He's a donkey driver that only drives the donkeys before the exalted holy ones.
Yeah, I think there's some Talmudic context which might be helpful to add here, which is that when sages and the righteous die biologically in the Talmud, they don't die, they don't actually die. There's just this sort of departure or this elevation that they experience. The Talmud famously says that the righteous, even during their deaths, are called living, and the wicked, even during their lives, are called dead, which is a really, I think, profound psychological observation. But then there's some very well-known Talmudic passages of sages who have passed on physically or biologically, and yet come home every Friday to make kiddush for their wives and for their children. So this theme of the deceased sage being very present in the world is certainly within the realm of the Talmudic mind. And I think also, like, we have to realize that this is not a 21st century Western text, and there are cultures where the dead are part of the living realm in a very real way. I think of many Latin American traditions where that's very much the case. So we may have to try not be anachronistic here and be comfortable with the dead still being around. What really struck me in this paragraph was it happens all quite quickly, and we can miss it. But they ask him, "Who's your father?" and he goes up and whispers to the mother, and the mother whispers to him. And we learn now that we're fleshing out his identity, and part of that identity is that he's an orphan, right? Is that his father is departed from the world, and the last thing that you want to ask a child whose parent is deceased is, "Where is your dad?" or "Where's your mom?" It's like you can imagine that the sages are then they're eating their own words in some sense, because he's like, "Yeah, my dad's dead." Like that's why he's not around. But then he doesn't give them. There's this sense where he doesn't, and maybe I'm sort of trying to read his character here, but he doesn't allow them to sit in that guilt, or allow himself to sit in that vulnerability, and he smacks back. It's like, well, my dad's dead, and if you would have been righteous, you would have seen him. Like, got you there. And maybe I feel like listen, this is my own reading now, and I'll admit that, but I feel like there's a sense where he's trying to cover up a painful part of his own identity, which is the fact that he doesn't have a father, by saying, "And who are you to you wouldn't see me anyway." There's a bit of a sense that I hear pain in this slapback here.
Yeah, it's just the way the 6-year-old respond from being hurt. Hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And so you get the clapback does feel like it feels like the response of a child. But I guess most of us, when we're faced with grief and trauma, we grown people even undergo kind of a reversion. But yeah, I sense that as well. Also, I just like the fact that the Zohar has this cast of characters, and it's great to like. I don't know about you, Zevi. When I'm reading like some fiction or something, or I'm reading thing, and you get to like learn from different stories about how a universe works. The Zohar is kind of fun like that because you learn little bits and pieces of things. And if you've studied other parts of the Zohar and you got to this, you're like, that's who the Yanuka's
Right.
father is.
Right.
You could totally be surprised because you've read about this donkey. The donkey driver is all over other parts of the Zohar.
Yeah.
And then you get to this section well off into Bamidbar, and close to the end really of the Zohar, and there's really this sort of revelation like, oh, like this is a family.
Yeah. It's a very nice kind of literary bit of world building here, of like adding a character that we always knew but never had a person for, and beginning to link up those parts together. It's quite exquisite.
And so it's nice. I guess I'll pick up. So Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Yitzchak, it seems to me that this child is not a human being. And he's probably not. That's also a Talmudic phrase. I think it's said of Rabbi Yochanan that sometimes he's praised as being meta-human. So it seems to me this child is not even human. And then they ate. I like that transition. You have this moment where they're like, my God, this child might be divine of some kind. And then they're like, okay, let's eat. It's a very Jewish transition.
It's also the one thing which only humans do, right? The angels don't eat classically when they pray to humans in rabbinic literature. Why? What is it? I'm curious what it is in the previous paragraph that make them respond that he's not human. Is it that he's privy to the realm of the undead, of these angelic beings? Is that what's making them feel that he's not human?
Yeah, and maybe this is a chavaya, right? Maybe they've encountered the donkey driver themselves. They know this guy. They've been goaded. I mean, in this case, they weren't goaded on by him. But
right.
they always get together and talk. And surely you can imagine that one of the, I don't know in the Sava who it is, what the characters are that are being with the donkey driver there. But because one can imagine they're like, hey, did you ever meet this weird donkey driver from so to so, and who's like knows all this Torah? They may have heard this and they're like, oh crap, like it's this kid. So maybe the writer of the text kind of like they know things that we don't know they know, of which one would be the miraculous nature of the Sava.
Right. It's also what's fun about this, I'm thinking now, like the way that it's blurring mythology and literature and real lived experience. Like living in Jerusalem now for the past few years, there are totally these characters, like these donkey drivers, like it exists. Like you'll bump into like a plumber or a gardener or a street cleaner who can just like begin reciting pages and pages of the Talmud, and they become these figures of lore and imagination, like in your own minds. And there's more famous characters. There's like the famous shoemaker and the tailor who are just, they're just like geniuses when it comes to Kabbalistic like lore. And so these are in a sense, they seem fantastical, but they're fantastical in a way that's actually totally realistic. And like in that these characters are actually there, of like people of great sagacity and piety who are living in ordinary jobs, doing ordinary labor, and then also the sense where the rabbis may be like taking these characters and turning them into these like mythological parts of their stories. So there's a sense where I get a sense from living here in this very bizarre and holy city where it's not all just literary fiction. Like they're playing with actual like events and characters in their own lives, and that's how it feels to me.
No, I totally agree. And also I think it's always you also get a sense of like the writers of this text are themselves kind of in exile. Like they're self-consciously aware that they're not like the other rabbis. And so I think that the one of the lessons here to take away from, and a lesson that I think that they want to have other people learn about them, is be careful who you think doesn't know secrets of Torah.
Right.
Like, the child, a donkey driver or whatever, like you have to be careful because you need to be humble, because just because you're highfalutin medieval Spanish rabbi, you may not even have, it's you that's not worthy to have the Taya come before you. And so we have to be we have to be careful about who, as scholars or whatever.
Right,
It's really
right.
important to never put yourself above anyone,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it could be the
yeah,
case that you could have these people could have unimaginable Torah or unimaginable knowledge,
yeah.
and we dismiss them before learning from them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we are tapping here into this motif of the hidden sage, or the hidden pious, the Lamed Vav, the 36 hidden
Mhm.
hidden saints of every generation. It's a very beautiful idea. The sense that, like, be careful who you talk to, because the bus driver and the guy who served you pizza and the cashier, they may just be like one in a generation sage, and you want to
Right,
pay attention to what they're going to say. They may drop some wisdom on you. And it
right,
kind of creates this possibility where every stranger is there to be like this beacon of wisdom, and it changes the way that you interact with quote unquote ordinary people, because who isn't there's no such thing as an ordinary person. Everyone has
of
wisdom
course,
to share, and that
yeah.
paradigm shift is a gorgeous one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great line in the instructions of Amenhotep, one of the earliest wisdom pieces of literature we have. It says, "Learn from the scribes and learn from the washerwomen." I
Mm.
love the idea of the lowest and the highest, like because everyone has something, everyone has wisdom. So yeah, I think that one of the lessons that you get from the Yanuka and from the Saba is be careful who you don't learn from.
Yeah,
Because also with the Yanuka, you might get schooled.
yeah,
you
oh
you
yeah.
might you might get involuntarily learned.
You might get
Um,
sniffed out,
yeah,
right?
yep, exactly. So it's like, hi, like you think you're so high and mighty, but yeah, wait till the Yanuka comes.
Oh
You get
yeah.
schooled by a 6-year-old. Um, so so the eight, and that child was still speaking words of Torah, innovations of Torah. I love that phrase, innovations of Torah, because
Mm.
I love we tend to think of um, there's two things going on. I think with that Chodshe Torah, I think that's what it is, and the Aramaic. I think the one we tend to think of the Torah's knowledge as all something that's been revealed in the past, and therefore we've lost it all, or we're every generation's weaker. It's kind of a Talmudic idea that we have less and less and less in every generation. But I like how the Zohar is self-conscious about that. Like this is an innovation of Torah, and it's putting in the way that you talked about with Malila, saying that this is sort of the Yanuka, sort of the self-consciousness of the Zohar itself, that he's innovating, he's doing innovations of Torah, right? And this is it at some
Yeah,
level. So I
yeah.
love that. It's like breaking the fourth wall. The text. It is the thing that he is doing. You are reading
Right,
it.
right, right. This act of us writing the chidushim about the chidushim is the innovation itself. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a very big fourth wall break. I mean, it's also, I think, it's this notion of the rabbis, of the this sort of strange tension and dialectic between the fact that, like, we're getting worse as we go on, this Yeridat Hadorat, this degradation of every generation, and then this beautiful Talmudic phrase of Kol Mash Tamid Vatik Atid Chadesh Nitna the Torah the Moshe Sinai, that anything that a future student is going to innovate was already given to Moses. It's
Right.
like this very beautiful rabbinic paradox that the Kabbalists are they're milin chadatin atikin, they're new old words, right? It's because you cannot really innovate something, or else it's not part of the canon. But if it's not part of the canon, but it needs to be innovated. So this beautiful dance between that which always was, and yet it's the words of Torah and innovations of Torah, and they're
Right.
both there in that line together, which is gorgeous.
Yeah. I love that. Innovations of Torah will be a great name for a shul. Um,
Chidushei
uh,
Torah.
yeah, Kaddish Torah. I think it would be like, because again, it's kind of chutzpahdik, but it
Mm.
also it's I don't know. I've always, yeah, it would be a cool name for a show.
There's also
Um,
there's also a sense where the Kabbalists, in like the project as a whole, and you see this definitely in later writers, and then in the Hasidic movement, where they not only are they creating innovations of Torah, like little tidbits and little innovations, but there's the sense of an entire new Torah, which is from Jeremiah
mhm.
31, I think it is.
Torah on the heart.
Right, the Torah of the heart, and in the
Yeah.
sense that the project is to re-articulate a Torah, and they have different coded names for it. It's the Torah of Atzilot, or the Torah of the Tree of Life, but this is the project that they're engaged in, and it's a very self-aware and very self-reflective, and we see that unfolding in front of our eyes.
Yeah, and again, I like the idea that not only is the canon not closed, but it is actively being innovated.
Right, being written. Yeah.
It's really being written. It's a very different sense of what counts as scripture. And I love that. One of the arguments I've made is that liberal Jews, progressive Jews, have abandoned the Zohar as scripture. And I'm like, no, this is absolutely scripture. Like, I don't know if I heard say it in my breath, because it's like we're doing it more academically, but like I say the bracha for studying Torah when I study this text, like, because this is for me, I would think of it as just as much canonical, even though I find it crazy. It's our crazy. So they were eating and speaking of words of Torah and innovations of Torah, and they finished eating, and they began to bench. Right? They say, "Come, let us bless." And he said to them, he said, "You've spoken well for the whole." And this is the first time he's given them a compliment. This is the first time that and again, it's the most. But it's funny because this is just the opening lines of the benediction for benching. They're doing something they would have done 1,000 times before. And
there's a great humor here. Like his compliment is more of a sting than his words.
It's an absolutely backhanded compliment.
It's such a backhand.
It's like finally you did something right.
Finally, you finally said it right. It's like they're doing the most routine thing possible. Yep. And it's like, wow, well done, guys.
It's so funny. Like, again, this is what people, I think what people should realize about these texts is that, they're super sacred and mystical or whatever. They're also hilarious.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely
great literature.
Yeah. And I don't think there's any contradiction for the Kabbalists. I don't think there's any contradiction between the humorous and the holy.
No.
One of the names for God in Arabic, in Islam is the humorous, from what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it has. I mean, again, it's like I said, I love the humor here. So he said to them, "You've spoken well, for the holy name is not blessed by the blessing without an invitation." So this is where we're going to get into some complicated stuff about being invited and inviting, this weird, interesting dialectic of invitation and being invited. Patach v'amar, he opened. That phrase, he opened, by the way, you see all the time in the Zohar. Although it's interesting here that we don't hear him ever say "come and see" like we always see in the Tachvazeh. That we never see him say that, at least not yet. That's a common way of when Zohar talk.
But we're about to see a tachazi come up in
he'll do it later, which folks should know that that's a self-conscious change on the part of the Zohar writer, because he's sort of riffing on the Midrash or the Talmud, which is always tashma, come and hear. The Zohar is very visual, come and see.
Right, which of course is riffing on the revelation at Sinai, which is both visual and auditorial, and those two things, the Shmiya and Riyah, hearing and seeing become interwoven, and for the mystic, it's about actually seeing the reality as opposed to just talking theory. They want to see and experience it for themselves.
Right. So he opened, "Let me bless Hashem at all times, always his praise in my mouth." This is from the Psalms. Let me praise Hashem. What prompted David to say, "Let me bless Hashem"? Right? It's a weird thing, right? Let me bless. It's a strange, it's like asking for, we think of praising God as sort of an obligation that you simply just do, as opposed to the idea that you have to be invited to do it. So David saw that an invitation is required, right? And he said, "Let me bless." So whenever a person sits at a table, the Shekhinah appears there, and the other side, the Sitra Achra, appears there as well. When he expresses an invitation to bless the Blessed Holy One, the KBH, the Sitra Achra is overwhelmed, and she is arrayed in her blessings, the Shekhinah, facing above, whereas the Sitra Achra, the other side, is excluded. And if a person does not express an invitation to bless the Blessed Holy One, the other side, the Sitra Achra, rejoices and tingles at having a share in that blessing. So this is this dialectic again, right? Where at all times we're in the Zohar's imagination, we're either feeding the Shekhinah, we're all getting closer to the Shekhinah, or our actions are feeding the Sitra Achra, they're feeding the Klipot, the other side. And so what the Yanuka is arguing here for is that if you're sitting at the table if you want to do the blessing correctly, you have to have an invitation to do the blessing. And if you do the blessing without an invitation, that feeds, at least in part, feeds Sitra Achra. So I think that's what the argument is here.
Yeah, I might add a bit of a Hasidic reading here, which is my own lineage, where like this stuff can all seem kind of bizarre and esoteric, and like, who are these demonic beings that we are and that are at the table? It's like, what kind of medieval nonsense is this? But I think there's something quite profound psychologically going on here as well, not to the exclusion of anything else, which is that when we sit to eat, there's a lot of energy at that table. There's a lot of kilojoules, there's calories, there's energy that's going to go somewhere, right? And the question is, what do we do? What do we do with that energy? And that energy can basically go, for the Kabbalist in this soft dualism, it can either go to a holy purpose or it could go to an impure purpose, the energy that we're consuming. And what allows us to take that energy from our consumption and bring it to the holy side is not just, so traditionally just making a blessing would be consecrating, designating these things now for the holy. But I think what the Kabbalist may be saying here is that when the act of blessing itself becomes so routinized, becomes routine, then it's no longer a moment of mindfulness of saying, okay, now I'm going to be eating for the sake of doing good with this food. And therefore we need to like add a new layer of mindfulness, which is to say, okay, well, guys, we're going to be blessing now, like havlan v'nivrech, and that is like setting the intention. And there's a sad irony, because anytime that you add something that becomes canon, it again becomes routine, right? And you need to keep adding. It's like, okay, we're now going to say that, we're going to say that, we're going to say that, we're going to bless, right? But the sense of, I just wanted to open up a psychological possibility of this, the other side and the holy side, where it's like, no, these are actually very real questions that could even be considered seriously by someone who's an atheist or agnostic. It's like, what do I do? How am I setting my intention with the energy, with my time, with my efforts, with my money? And I think there's something that's very true here.
Yeah, and I like the idea that of I think in the logic of invitation, what they'll get into in just a minute, the idea that how like the idea of being invited to bless. I like that idea. And there's, again, I think it's in Pirkei Avot, right, where they said that that back in the day, the ancient Hasidim would wait and they would meditate a whole hour before engaging in prayer. I always say that my davening is just that hour. I never get to the davening. That's not true, but yeah, I love the idea of invitations, and the idea of invitations obviously opens up the conversation in a bigger way in just a second. And the Yanuka says, right, you might say, why is there no invitation for the other blessings? Well, the object over which one blesses is itself an invitation. I like the idea that the things that we are blessing are inviting us to bless them.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's a beautiful idea that when that and they link this, right, and we'll get to this more in a second, right? The idea that that objects around us are, it's sort of Spinozistic, right? In a Kabbalistic way, they have this sort of inner dynamism, that they want to be blessed, that they're inviting us to bless them. It's a lovely idea that the world wants to be holy.
It's funny you say Spinoza, whose name means blessing, right? Baruch Benedictus.
Yeah, but I love the idea that there's sort of a cognitive drive in the Kabbalah for things to become holy.
Right, for things to be blessed. Yeah, their very presence is an invitation for blessing. Yeah.
It's a really lovely idea. So yeah, we get to come and see. There we go. Come and see.
Tachazeh.
So yeah, we get our first come and see. Come and see it. So if someone says a blessing over fruit, that fruit itself is an invitation, and he says the blessing over it, and the other side has no share in it. Before this, when that fruit is in the domain of the other side, one does not say a blessing over it. As is written, it shall not be eaten. This, folks may this is a halakhic thing that folks may not know, that there's a period of time, it's 3 years, right? That when fruit is growing on a tree, you're not allowed to eat any of the fruit off a fruit tree for the first 3 years or 4 years. I think there's debate about 3 years. So that the fruit for the first 3 years is in the domain of the other side. So like if you plant an apple tree, for the first 3 years, those apples belong to Sitra Achra.
Right. It's referred to as Arla, is the biblical term there.
Right. And it's funny because this links us back to the earlier conversation around the foreskin.
Correct.
because they're again they're the it's language of like it has the foreskin on it. They're same with the language of circumcision earlier.
Correct. Yeah. Arel is the shorish, the source of that word is uncircumcised, is
Yeah.
unready, which is interesting as well. This idea of the Yanuka in many Kabbalistic and now Hasidic circles, we don't cut a boy's hair until they're 3 years old,
Right.
which is known as the upsharon. And I mean, I didn't have my hair cut until I was 3. The sense that it's not ready to be brought into the world yet.
Right.
It's there's still some sort of unconscious other side force that's over it, and that applies to the agriculture as well. It's not a very well known Jewish agricultural law, but it's a fascinating one, and I think that there's a lot of very beautiful sort of earthbound wisdom that exists in these precepts.
And it's also interesting. It belongs to the other side. Like I always like the idea that the klipot can't be starved. It's not fair to completely starve them. They have to have their share too.
Yeah.
Now you don't give them more than they should, and you have to give them to it appropriately. It's Job, right, is famous for having deprived the Sitra Achra completely.
Right.
And so like you're not allowed to deprive the Sitra Achra completely. They do get their share.
Yeah.
It's just about the appropriateness of their share.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I've just always liked that idea that the Zohar doesn't think of evil as a thing that should be. It doesn't think of it as a privation, the way that Neoplatonism does, and it doesn't think of it as something completely to be obliterated. It thinks of it something that it's a necessary part of reality that will be redeemed, but it can only be redeemed if it's there.
A necessary evil, right?
It is.
Yeah. I was gonna mention this earlier when we were chatting about it, about the fingernail water that goes to the other side. In that we do give it the sustenance in the form of the dirt under the nails, which is we want to feed it, but we don't want it to be strong, so we don't give it any meat. We just give it a bit of dirt here and there. But it's a very profound idea, which I know, Justin, you've covered in some of your brilliant content. This idea of giving the devil its due is a very rich Kabbalistic idea. I think perhaps the strongest motif, one which you've discussed, is the Seir Azazel. It's the goat which is taken off during the high holidays during Yom Kippur, and taken and thrown off in the desert, or whatever that term means. a bit of a strange term. But the Kabbalists read that as that there's one goat, one sacrifice which is given to God, and the other one which is given to the Satan, or to the other side, because if we don't give it its due, then it's going to come demanding it from us.
Right.
And again, just to add in the psychological element, which is I guess my Achilles heel, is that we can't ignore the shadow in the human. The shadow would be the psychological version of the other side here. If we just try and starve it, be like, no, we're just pure people. We have no dark side in us. Then you're lying to yourself. Like, you have to actually give that part of you its due. And I think that a lot of modern psychology, it's like, no, there needs to be places where people can let off their aggression, where people can have a place to express violent, hateful tendencies in a contained way, and that's giving the psychological devil its due. And I think this is I'm always reading, when I see the Kabbalists discussing something metaphysical, I'm always thinking that they're also talking on the psychological level, and I think that's very much here the case as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and again, I like the idea that if I ever see a fruit tree that's less than 3 years old or whatever, when you see the fruit growing on it, you're like, it really is forbidden fruit. Like, it doesn't belong to this world. It is for the other world. Yeah, that's just I don't know. It also makes the world kind of spooky. Like, there's just fruit trees out there for the other side, but they're not so spooky. It's just that it's the way the nature is set up.
It also makes it. I think there's a big difference here between the sacred and the profane, or the sacred and the secular, where the secular sense is that whatever is in front of me is available to me and I can take it, and the sacred is like, no, there are things which you're not allowed to touch, the things that are forbidden to you, and that sense of prohibition creates this realm of kadosh in Hebrew means separate. Right. It's a sense of saying there's one day a week where you're not allowed to do work. There's 3 years where you can't touch the fruit. And it's a sense that it's like the human is not the be and end all. You don't decide when you can eat from the tree or not. The tree has its own nature, and the tree and the Torah, which purports to be, knowing the nature of reality, will tell you when you're allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to touch it just whenever you want to. And there's something quite beautiful about that, I find.
Yeah. I mean, the same with the corners of the fields and things like that. They're
things
Correct, they're not for you. So, so that no blessing will be said over that fruit, and the other side will not be blessed. You can't, if you say the blessing and eat the fruit too early, then it's for Sitra Achra. As soon as it leaves his domain, the domain of Sitra Achra, it may be eaten, and a blessing is set over it. It's interesting that the order there. It can be eaten and a blessing is set over it. It should go the other way.
Right.
I don't know. This the stuff my mind goes to. So it can be eaten and a blessing set over it, and the fruit itself is an invitation to the blessing. Similarly, with all things of the world over which blessings are said, all of them are an invitation to blessing, and the Sitra Achra has no share in them. So again, it's about when things are appropriate to consume and what things may not be appropriate to consume at all.
Right. I think the point maybe that is ending here is that when it's subject to blessing, then it's able to be redeemed from the other side. It's that which is not blessable, which cannot be eaten either.
Right. Because if you do bless it, you just it just further gives to the other side. Because I mean, but the Sitra Achra has it. It's like it's giving too much. It's giving too much. All right, I'll finish this paragraph. Now you might say, so too with grace after meals, the cup of blessing isn't the invitation. Why come let us bless? Well, because previously when one drank and said, the one who creates the brave Gaffen was the invitation, what creates the fruit of the vine, the cup was the invitation. So now for benching for grace after meals, we need a change for another invitation, right? Because we need another. We it's if you're drinking wine, you've already done the first blessing, so you need something new must be there. Since the cup is for the Holy Blessed One, not for food, therefore a verbal invitation is required. So it's just a problem of you've already said the blessing, so what? Why So now you have to ask permission to bless again.
Was that paragraph satisfying to your Litvish mind?
Yeah, I mean, I do like that. Yeah, sure. Like as much as any of this is logical stuff. I love when they see problems when they don't. That's always my I'm like, this is the thing that struck you.
This is problematic, right?
Yeah, like of all the things, right? That is problematic. So yeah,
But there is this Talmudic and Litvish kind of side of the the Gavra Hefza without getting too complex here, but like this object has already been blessed for. It's already been spoken for. It can no longer be an invitation for blessing, and therefore, because it's already like exhausted its invitation, it needs to be re-invited in some sense, and it's that's a cute sense.
All right, so let me check the time. So I got about 8 minutes left for today. We're gonna be doing this for a while. This is gonna go on for half as long as your Maimonides series went on.
I think we covered more than I thought we would. I think we're doing good.
Yeah. Do you want to pick it up and we'll?
I think we're just about. This is the end of a section, and then it's going to be entering onto. We're going to be returning to the question of the bars and the Mishkan, the tabernacle that we opened up earlier. We're going to see themes begin to reconnect. Now you might say, continues the Yanuka, continues the child, let us bless him of whose bounty we have eaten is the invitation. And blessed is he of whose bounty we have eaten is the blessing. So he's saying that within the prayer of the benediction of the grace after meals, we already have a self-contained invitation and blessing. So why do we need to add another verbal blessing? Certainly so. But let us bless is another invitation. The preceding, which is the verbal exclamation that he was congratulating them for. The preceding invitation is an invitation to the cup of blessing, undefined. And once this cup is grasped, it becomes another invitation with the phrase "Let us bless" to the upper world, from which all sustenance issues. Therefore, it is expressed in a concealed manner, for the upper world is concealed, and an invitation can be expressed towards it only with this rung, the cup of blessing. So here he gives an esoteric answer to a Talmudic question. And I apologize, Justin, for the text. But so to unpack this, he's saying that it seems already that we have an additional invitation. We don't. So fine, the cup's already been used. Its invitation has been spent, but we have an invitation in the blessing itself. And he says, yes, that's fine, and that's a self-contained blessing. But there's another thing here which needs to be blessed, which is the real source of sustenance, which is not the food, but it is the upper world, is where the shefa, where the divine, where the divine mazon, where the divine sustenance comes down to us from, and that we can only bless specifically with the cup of blessing. There's something concealed about the cup, and mirroring concealed can do that for us. And I'm wondering what it is what's this rung of the cup of blessing that's concealed? Do you have something on that, Justin?
I mean, I think that that must be the case that, I mean, again, the Zohar is thinking about everything as existing simultaneously on several different ontological levels, and that you can move your analysis up and down those registers of reality. And I think that what the argument here is that the rabbis are never going to let what is apparently a redundancy go to waste.
Right.
And so the apparent redundancy isn't a redundancy. It's that one is the invitation for like the cup of Yetzirah, the cup of this world, but the actual other one is for the supernal cup. And therefore you move up a register, and therefore it eliminates the redundancy, and it satisfies the need for the second invitation.
Yeah. There's also a sense where the cup. I mean, the play of register also has to be symbolized. They're not just pulling out of thin air. There's something what they're going on. And I don't see Matt making reference to this, but I know that there is a custom amongst Kabbalists and amongst the Hasidic in the Hasidic world where the cup of red wine represents concealment, because if you look down directly into the cup, you don't see to the bottom of the cup. You see your own reflection, and the lack of transparency of the wine, and the Kabbalists prefer red wine for this and other reasons, represents concealment itself, and it's very woven into their reading of Shabbat as a day of concealment and a day of mystery. So perhaps there's something of the motif that the hiddenness of the cup represents the hiddenness of the upper realm itself, where you cannot see past the heavens into the celestial realms. I know there is, and this is also just taking a gander at it, but I know that there is, until today, there's a Hasidic custom to look down into the Kiddush cup to see the darkness in one's own reflection when we recite the Kiddush, and that may be at play here.
Then it's also filled to overflowing, right?
That's also as well, right? Which represents the divine, the upper realm, which is overflowing. So there's that.
That has to be what they have in mind. Is that, again, it's the two worlds are mirroring each other. So you can imagine the cup, the celestial cup is mirroring the earthly cup, and that both are overflowing and both are concealed. Yeah, I've always known that about the Hasidic people, that you guys prefer red wine. I mean, but in a pinch, would white wine do?
Yeah. White wine is like, as long as like the bracha is hagafen, then it's wine, and wine is wine. Yeah. But for the Hasidic and Kabbalistic mind, the symbology is so rich, that they're wanting to tap into. There's also, this point that we're saying here, I think is here in the text explicitly, that the preceding invitation is invitation to the cup of blessing undefined, that there's the terrestrial cup, and then there's the undefined cup, and the undefined cup is the celestial cup, which is this cup of mirror, which is also such a powerful idea. When you raise your cup down here in this world, there's the sense where like there are multiple things happening. There's the physical cup which you're raising, then there's like the astral cup which you're raising, and for the Kabbalists, those are all interwoven in that act, which is part of what I love about it. It's so tied into the act of eating and drinking, and it's not that they're like meditating away and getting there by holding the cup. They're holding multiple cups, metaphysical cups, cosmological cups.
Right. Yeah, I think that's and again, it just like shows how deep the tradition is in terms of how this stuff has been really taken up into it. So, all right, do you want to finish the last line of this section before we wrap?
Let's do it. Rabbi Yehuda said, Happy is our share. Ashrei chalkenu, for since days of old until now, I have never heard such words. Surely, as I said, this is no human being. So Rabbi Huda ends by praising that from days of old until now, from days of old until the young child, no words we haven't heard these things. Surely this is not a human being. An exclamation of his astonishment with what he's encountered, and he's feeling grateful to be in the presence of this child, which indicates to me a sense of humility that although he's been really beaten up and he's also quite bruised and soaring from the young child, he feels deeply grateful to have encountered this celestial human who's just pouring out these deep riches and wisdoms upon the sages.
Yeah, and I love the literal reading of from days of old, Min Yom Alma, from eternity. I,
Hmm.
I I love, like, when you from days of old just sounds like, olden times, but I love the idea that that there's out of eternity there's been
Hmm.
nothing like this. That the Yanuka is eternally, what's the right word? Like, there's something weirdly unique about him out of all eternity. I love
Right.
that. The scope can
Right.
get really big if you read it really literally.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, we also have to pull out of the narrative here. We're being intoxicated by the narrative, but remember, it's the authors that are writing the Yanuka. So when they're writing, wow, these words have never been said since eternity. They're talking about themselves here. They're
right.
talking about the Yanuka, which is them, the Zohar. So
No, and again, their tongue is planted in their cheek. I mean, they're again, this is an old text for us, but like you said, this is an innovation of Torah. They would have been like, wow, no. And again, Moses, not Maimonides, God forbid, but Moshe de Leon, like the first time we see a quotation of the Zohar outside the Zohar is in one of Moshe de Leon's own books, where he's using it as a proof text for a point he's
hmm,
making.
it's
I love
already
the
the audacity.
Yeah, I love the audacity of that. And again, are we surprised that this guy and his friends would be audacious? Of course not. I mean,
No, they're wildly audacious.
this
They're
is
they're they're they have both the audacity of the 6-year-old and of the 90-year-old Saba. Both of them are in there.
no, right. And I think that's a great point, is that they both are, the child and the old man. Like,
Yeah,
they have the audacity, but also it's a very grounded audacity. Like, these are not wild guys. They're really, every single word of this is grounded in the Chazal, in the Torah, and they speak the tradition. It's not like they're coming
yeah,
out of the tradition, but they're taking really, really powerful new ideas and getting the tradition, the tradition speaking them.
yeah,
So, um, on the one hand, they're very audacious. On the other hand, they're hyper traditional,
yeah,
hyper traditional,
yeah, yeah.
much more so than Maimonides. Um,
Right. They're not quoting Aristotle here, for example,
yeah,
which
exactly.
is where their power comes from, right?
Yep. All right, folks. Well, I don't know how many pages we got through. We got through what, 10, 5. Um, I think in Hebrew we've gotten through just like a daf. I think not even a daf. Yeah.
It's great.
Okay, guys. Well, folks. Well, I just want to say, like, I think Zevi, we've agreed we're gonna do the entire Yanuka.
Yeah,
Yep. So we're gonna do the entire thing. This is like a long. This is a pretty long text. So, uh, I think we're gonna try to do it every week and work our way through it and see how it goes. But I'm glad the folks could hang out. And I think at one point you had like over 300 something people watching two weirdo guys chavrusa on Zohar. But I really appreciate the folks came out, and I hope that folks come back and we'll continue. This is, I mean, there were really, I mean, aside from doing it in Aramaic, which would be, I think, much too challenging for myself. But this is the text. This is what I think. This is a pretty classic glimpse into the wit and the depth and the genius of the Zohar. So it's a fun text, and we have like 90 more pages to go. So at least in the Daniel Matt. So yeah, hopefully see you guys next week. Does that have any concluding words?
No, just thank you, Justin, for tapping me into this awesome opportunity to converse with the text with you. It's a real shame because being a content creator, I don't get much time to learn for myself, and the only way that I get to sit down and learn is if it's content or it's like contentified in some sense.
Yep.
So I hope this counts as some Torah learning, and it's a great pleasure, and I'm very grateful that you pulled me into this.
Of course, of course. All right, folks. We'll see you next week for more of the wit, wisdom, and burns of the Yanuka. See you guys.